Hi, good afternoon. It's a pleasure for me to be here today. I'm a radiation oncologist, but I think we only treat a few hundred people a year. And even though it's gratifying, I actually think policy and politics are much more important. So with that in mind, I want to present the author today. In 1987, Gary Hart, who was an articulate, dashing, refreshingly progressive politician who seemed to be a shoo-in for the Democratic nomination for president, everything was going well until his campaign came off the rails. There were rumors of marital infidelity, and a picture that those of us here in South Florida probably remember of Gary Hart with a model on a yacht named Monkey Business. And the scandal erupted in a blaze of 24-hour news cycle, tabloid speculation, late-night farce. And our author, I think, is uniquely qualified to present the story of politics meeting media. He's a national political columnist for Yahoo News. For more than a decade, he was a political correspondent for the New York Times magazine, and he covered 3 presidential campaigns. In All the Truth Is Out, the week Politics Went Tabloid, Bai shows how the Hart affair really marked a crucial turning point in the ethos of political media, and by extension of politics itself, as the candidate's character began to draw more fixation than their political experience. So I think for those of us in South Florida, because of that history of the yacht going to Bimini, it's a must-read for all of us. So I'm proud and happy today to present the author of All the Truth Is Out, the week Politics Went Tabloid, Mr. Bai.
Hi. What an awesome event, and what a great crowd. Thank you for coming. I know, I want to, first of all, I want to thank Dr. Austin for that terrific introduction. He's being modest, but he actually does the really important work, and if I had been a little bit smarter and paid a little more attention in math, things might have bounced the other way. But I'm very honored to have his introduction. I know Bob Herbert was supposed to be here today, another former Times person like myself, and I believe there was some illness in the family and he couldn't make it. So I'm going to close my eyes for 5 seconds, and all of you who came just to see Bob Herbert can sort of trickle out, and I won't. I'm actually not going to do that because there'll be nobody left, so I'm going to make sure I'm not going to close my eyes. This book came out at the end of September, the very last day of September. So I've been all over the country at this point, Los Angeles, San Francisco, Seattle, Denver, I've been in Boston, a bunch of times in New York. It's terrific to come here to this, which I think is the premier book event in the country. It's also, and I've never been, so it's really cool to see. I've only heard about it. It's also a little ironic to come back here after all that, because obviously this is in large part where this story began, here in Miami. It's the story that, it's that part of the story that people remember. It was sort of an interesting period, I know, in Miami's life, and a story in some ways that brought the Miami Herald to national prominence as a really, as a great newspaper in America. And I understand they're taking that building down. Am I right about that? That the Herald. It's a weird time in our industry. I mean, as Dr. Austin mentioned, I'm now the national political columnist for Yahoo. We just moved a couple weeks ago into the building on 43rd Street that was the New York Times, where I started working for the magazine, and is now Yahoo's building. So it's a weird time in the industry. I love all these old buildings, and I was sorry to hear that. Well, in any event, this book is a journey for me. It's a story, and for me, it didn't begin in Miami. Hopefully it doesn't end in Miami either, but it didn't begin in Miami. For me, it's a journey that started at the end of 2002. when I was a brand new writer for the New York Times Magazine, and I noticed an item in the newspaper, our newspaper. It was just a couple of paragraphs, and it said, Gary Hart was thinking about running for president again. How many people here remember Hart from those? This is not a college audience, I know. I usually see not a single hand anywhere, and I know I'm in for a rough road. So like me, many of you are probably, like me, remember this kind of vaguely. I was in my college dorm room in 1987, and I was reading Newsweek, a magazine I would later work for, and I remembered vaguely this incredible star of the moment, how huge he was and how quickly he was gone, and really gone. And I thought to myself, why would a guy who went through something that awful and humiliating want to go through that again? And one of the great things about being a magazine writer and a columnist, which is the thing I really love about my job, is that I called him up and I said, hi, I work for the New York Times Magazine, can I come see you? And he said, sure. And I got on a plane and I went to Denver and I met him. And a few things struck me about Hart at that time. First of all, he was and remains and is now actually working again in diplomacy. He's the new special envoy to Northern Ireland, which is great. Hart is a flat-out brilliant man. Who can draw from all measure of literature and history and politics. And I realized that he also, he had a great sense of humor, which I think he did not have necessarily in his day as a politician. I think he's mellowed over the years. But also, he was not going to run for president again. It became clear to me pretty quickly that what Hart really wanted was to serve, was to matter, was to be taken seriously and have some value to his country. It struck me as a poignant story. I wrote a story about it. He didn't like the story. It was not a story he particularly should have liked. And I went away, and that was that. Except it wasn't that, because it haunted me over the years. I think as a writer, and any of you who write too will know, you hate the feeling that something's left, not excavated, that there's a level you haven't gotten to. And I felt that there was a level of that story I hadn't gotten to, and there was something about it that bothered me. I went on to cover 2 more presidential campaigns, and I saw the way the candidates regarded me across a table like a hired assassin who had come to see them. And why were they sitting across from someone who wanted to kill them? And how frightened they were, and how little they would say, and how little they would offer by way of ideas, and how much of our campaigns were given over, as Dr. Austin said, to these discussions of character, this broad discussion of personality and less to issues. And I thought there was a connection between Hart's moment and the one I was living in, and my mounting frustration with trying to write about politics. And I went back to it. I started to look back at it, talk to people about it. And one of the things I found very quickly is that just about everything we think we remember about that moment turns out to be wrong. In a remarkable way, we all know that Hart was driven out of the race by this photograph that you all know better than I do, of Donna Rice sitting on Hart's lap on the boat in Bimini. Well, in fact, that's not true. Actually, the picture's taken on a dock, not a boat, so there were hundreds of people milling around. It's not the illicit moment you probably think it was, and it didn't come out till weeks after he was out of the campaign. It had absolutely nothing to do with the end of his presidential aspirations. We all thought we remembered, I thought we remembered, that Hart had challenged the media to follow him around, and then inexplicably and foolishly had gone out and had this tryst when he had just told people to follow him. That's actually not what happened at all. He actually did give that quote. He said it to a single reporter, E.J. Dionne, who had the job of the New York Times Magazine that I would later have. It had not been published. First of all, Dionne didn't see it as a challenge. Hart didn't mean it as a challenge. It wasn't published initially. It wasn't published when the Herald started pursuing the story. It wasn't published when they planned their surveillance. It wasn't published when they did their surveillance. There's now a little bit of controversy around this that you may have seen, and there's some invented memory around this, but the reality is, no matter how you look at it, that quote had nothing to do with starting the Herald story or the investigation of Hart, and was completely separate. That decision was made by the Miami Herald. That decision was made by us as an industry, and we never really talked about it that way. And I started to get very interested in this, because anytime as a journalist you see things that are wrongly perceived or remembered, you know there's something else going on.